Thank you, Roger. That's definitely what we're looking to hear, I think, or what people didn't want to hear. I don't know. But we're going to record that. This is recorded, of course, so we'll put this online. But I think there are a couple of questions before we get into the details of what our next plans for mobilization, or how we are going to form those plans. Let me see. I think we have one from Sandra. Or does anybody? How about let's just start at the top. So anybody who has a question, I saw some questions scroll through. But anybody who has a question, just type stack in the chat, and then we'll take them in order. Give everybody a fair shot. Eric Gill.
Yeah, thank you. Roger, amongst the many things that you just said, one thing that you said is that XR is not about communication, and I don't understand what you meant by
that. What I'm trying to say is that the progressive movements and the NGOs and the mainstream climate movement has been under the delusion for 30 years that through just giving people information, then we're going to sort the problem, right? I mean, if you're dealing with a non-emotional, non-power entrenched issue, that works, right? You know, if I want you to pass the salt, I'll ask you to pass the salt and you give me the salt, right? But if my whole culture and economic interest is be it on racial oppression, me going up to see you and saying, you know what, you're perpetuating racial oppression, that's a complete waste of time, right? Because there's no way in a million years you're going to change. And if you go to the corporate state and say we need to reduce carbon emissions by 7.5% a year, that's a complete waste of time. Because the fundamental law of politics is you never get anywhere without a struggle when you're dealing with entrenched power. And that's not a moral or philosophical thing, right? I'm a social scientist. That's what I specialize in, is the mechanics of political change and how to bring them about. So if it's a little airy-fairy sort of issue, that's fine. You can talk about it. But if you want to actually create real change, as Martin Luther King showed, and Gandhi and everyone else, right? What you're looking for is high-level political struggle, you know, where thousands of people get arrested, thousands of people go to prison, some people die, and it's a shit show, right? There's nothing pretty about it. And that's where we're at. And what Extinction Rebellion is doing, let me make this as clear as I can, right? It's a complete change from the old style political movements around climate change, right? It's not about lobbying. It's not about cozying up to the elites. It's not about sitting on committees. It's not about going to Los Angeles Council, right? And going, they're really trying really hard on the climate emergency. It's about going to Los Angeles Council or whoever rules Los Angeles and saying, you've totally fucked up. And we want you to do this, 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 and this, right? To decarbonize Los Angeles in 5 years. And if you don't, then we're going to be bang, 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 right? Until you have us banged up. Because this is beyond outrageous that you can consider destroying America, destroying our next generation, right? Destroying nature, destroying the whole fucking world. You see what I mean? It's a different, we're over it. You see what I'm trying to say? You know, people in America understand this, right? You've had, you know, Martin Luther King, you've had Larry Kramer, right? You know how to do this stuff. But what's happened for 30 years is it's been a nice guy routine, right? I mean, I'm a nice guy, but I'm not a nice guy anymore. Right? Which is why I get into trouble. I don't give a fuck anymore because this is too outrageously bad. So that's the difference, right? It's about creating an ultimatum and a demand and then engaging in civil resistance. And the other thing I want to make clear is it's about engaging in that regardless of who follows, right? This is one of the things Extinction Rebellion America are moving towards, right? We're not waiting until we've got a whole load of celebrities and, you know, the progressive establishment of California on side, right? We're saying there's 20 of us, right? We're going to go and block a road in San Francisco. And then a month later, we're going to come back and do it again. And that's how you create change. It's not, you don't create change by going to loads of conferences and being subjected to the, you know, collective action problem, as they call it in academia, right? Everyone's waiting for everyone else to make a move. You know, when we set up Extinction Rebellion, there were 15 people in the room, right? And we were done. You know, most of us have been at this game for 30 years. I started activism when I was 14, right? I'm 54 now. I've done everything. You know, I've been arrested dozens of times. I've been to prison 6 or 7 times. It doesn't bother me. But what we're saying here with Extinction Rebellion is we're out of time, right? So what my message to you is start thinking about talking to your partners, right? You've got to talk. You need to think about your jobs. You need to think about your community. Who's going to support you, right? Because this isn't sit down in the road once every half year and get a $200 fine. That's not where we're at anymore. You know, like Martin Luther King talked about a 10,000 person non-violence army. That's where we're at, right? And they give up everything for a year and they go bang, 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 right? Every few weeks. That's what civil resistance looks like. That's what they considered doing in the civil rights movement. That's what they did in the Salt March, right? 60,000 Indians were arrested and put into prison to get rid of the British. This isn't amateur stuff. You see what I'm trying to say here? It's wake up. And it's not wake up like I'm trying to get you to do something really harsh, because it's going to be even more harsh if you don't do it. You see what I'm saying? You know, like that woman in the children's march in 1963, you've seen the film, right? They talk to a 16-year-old girl and they go, aren't you putting yourself in harm's way? And she said, we're going to get into harm's way anyway, right? So this thing's coming down the line anyway. It's not like sit there on a Zoom call and go, that Roger Hallam, he's being a little bit too radical. You know, I'm going to sort of sit that one out for a while, because in 2 years' time, it's going to be like 20 times worse. You know, we've got a window of 6 months, a year, 5 years maximum until we lock in catastrophic violence. You see what I'm saying? This is like nothing that's happened in the last 10,000 years of human history. This isn't slavery. It's not, you know, Hitler. It's not a linear opponent, obscene as those struggles were. This is like the geophysical system. When that Arctic is gone, it's gone, right? No one knows how to put it back again. You see what I mean? You know, that's what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Next we have a question from Alberto. I think that came in the chat. So Alberto asks, if all vehicles are electric and all electricity from renewables by 2030, do we have a chance? I don't know if we want to.
Yeah, I'll answer it.
Assemblies. Go ahead.
Look, you know, like, I get this sort of question all the time, and those of you who know me know how I answer it, right? We're not put into this world to try and control the world, right? We're put into this world in order to live a good life. That's all we can ask for in this world, right? We're in a situation now where no one knows whether we're going to like make it through. There's very, very good reasons why we're not going to make it through. But that's not the issue. For 99% of human history, for 99% of human beings, the issue was not the outcomes of what's going to happen in my life. It was how I react to those outcomes. And what we need to do in the Western world is return to those traditions, right? That say, maybe we will, you know, maybe we won't be annihilated, or maybe we will. But that's not relevant anymore. What's relevant is that I live a life of virtue. And the life of virtue at this point in history is a life of civil resistance. because only through civil resistance will you maximize the possibilities such as they are, right? I mean, we can spend like half an hour discussing all the ins and outs of what needs to happen and whether it's going to be successful or not. But none of that discussion affects what we should do, right? You see what I mean? It's like when your children are burning to death on that first floor of the house, you're not sitting there trying to work out the odds. You see what I'm trying to say? You know, so it's not my role, and with all due respect, I don't think it's your role to try and work out the odds of what's going to happen. All we know is we have to act immediately. And as you may know, the aim of Extinction Rebellion is not to tell the American population or the British population what they have to do. What we're saying is the whole of America has to come together. The whole of each country has to come together in a citizens' assembly so that the people themselves will decide and give political legitimacy to the massive transformation that is coming anyway, right? It's coming anyway. It's just a matter of whether it has legitimacy and whether it comes in time. Everyone knows the industrial system's gone, right? It's not, that system isn't going to be here in 20 years because of social collapse or because of an ecological transformation. So our job on this call is not to go, well, you know, what are the odds? Our job as human beings and, you know, people who wish to leave a legacy of responsibility to our children is to say, right, when's the next civil disobedience, you know, training? That's what I suggest is the question at this point in history.
We have a question from Terry. Wait, I can't find. Terry, do you want to say what your question is?
Sure. Hi, Roger. Good to see you again. This is really kind of getting down into the minutia a little bit instead of the real thrust of what you're talking about in terms of it's not a matter of causes anymore. It's a matter of action. But I do kind of struggle with the fact that we hear all about the tropospheric blanket effects of greenhouse gas emissions, but we hear little or nothing about the umbrella effects of the loss of aerosol masking. From a scientific perspective, it seems to me that both of these need to be taken into account for us to have a good sense of how and when all of this collapse is going to come about. If we're going to talk about our mass extinction, both of those factors and many others come into play. Guy McPherson, for instance, projects abrupt climate changes happening in matters of weeks or months rather than years or decades. Are we already seeing those kinds of abrupt tipping points coming about?
Well, look, you know, the reason I'm not sort of particularly answering Alberto's question and yours, Terry, is not because I don't care or because I don't know, right? I mean, I read 2 or 3 science articles every day and have done for about 3 or 4 years, right? So I can talk to you about the science, right, for, you know, a good 3 or 4 hours. But why are we doing that? That's my question to you. I mean, why do you need to know? The reason I suggest you need to know is because you're still bargaining with your life. You're still trying to work something out because you're trying to maintain control. We don't have control, right? We're all going to be dead soon anyway. That's what life is. You're going to be dead soon. So does it really matter if it's in 6 months or in 10 years or in 30 years? Is that the most important thing, trying to work that out? I would suggest it's not. I'd suggest like it's a function of our cultural infantilism, right? That we are so obsessed with our own self-preservation and our own self-knowledge. And as I said, for most people in human history, they didn't have the privilege or luxury of trying to work out what the odds were of what was going to happen in their life, right? What they were concerned with was honoring their tradition, which means honoring their ancestors, the people that came before them, and conversely, the people that are going to come after them. So in short, like, yes, there's a strong possibility everything will be totally fucked within 10 years because of methane and because of global dimming, right? Global dimming is 0.2 degrees centigrade to 1 degree centigrade, right? Everyone knows that in the industry. So it's a really, really big problem. But conversely, we might have geoengineering, no one quite knows. And then we don't know what's going to happen to the Amazon. There's loads of unknowns. But what we do know is 2 years ago, 2 million acres of Californian forest burned down, right? And this year it was 4 million. So you just get a ruler out, right? In 10 years' time, it's going to be 8 million, give or take. So does that affect what you're going to be doing after this call? Whether it's 6 million acres or 20 million acres? You see what I'm trying to say? The kids are burning to death on the top floor of your house, right? Fucking get in there and rescue them. There's not a 500,000 acres of Californian forest option anymore, right? It's not going to go back down. You know, the fire isn't going to miraculously go out and your kids just come out with a little bit of a burn. They're burning to death. So practically, it's not a question, is it? The question is, when am I going to talk to my partner about getting arrested? You know, when am I going to start reading up about LA jails? You know, when am I going to do a workshop, you know, with 20 people in LA who say, right, we're going to give up our jobs, we're going to get some funding, and we're going to go out every 4 weeks and cause non-violent hell. Those are the questions, right? When people get serious about absolute immorality, those are the questions they start asking, right? They're not asking whether the injustice is unjust anymore. You see what I'm trying to say? You know, I mean, in 1995, we could have a nice chat about this stuff, right? I'm sure some of us on this call were around in 1995 going, you know what? There's a little bit of a problem with climate. You remember those days, right? And we'd be going, well, maybe we should have, you know, a little bit of a carbon tax. You know, the carbon tax days have gone. They went in like 2005. What we're dealing now is catastrophe or extinction. Those are the two things on the table. You know, that when they're talking about it in the Pentagon, that's what they're talking about, right? When they're talking about it in the bars of the IPCC conferences, that's what they're talking about. That's what they're talking about in Davos. That's what XR is talking about. That's where we're at. I mean, it's tough, right? Don't get me wrong, it's tough as fuck, but that's the way it is, you know? I mean, I was there like 10 years ago looking at 15 acres of rotten vegetables, right? Out of my head with stress. I mean, totally out of my head with stress. You know, I just invested £100,000, right? I lost that much money in 3 months. I mean, I'm not a rich man, as you know. You can imagine what that did to me, right? Well, think about that and times it by 100 million, right? Because 100 million farmers around the world are out of their head with stress at this exact moment in time. You know, that's why 60,000 Indian farmers have already committed suicide. So just consider this when you're talking to people in LA, right? Where's your food coming from? It's coming from farmers. What's happening for farmers? They're killing themselves. Why? Because the weather is being destroyed systematically by the corporate system. And sooner or later, that means you're going to go into a supermarket in LA and there's going to be no food on the tables, you know, no food on the shelves, and there's going to be fights outside. And we saw that with COVID, right? With the toilet roll. So it's just a little bit more further along the line, right? And you're going to have body parts on the streets. This is nothing unusual. It happens every 50, 100 years in human history. It's just coming around again for a final time.
All right, so I think Sandra's got a question. It says, well, I think this is a two-part question. We are looking at the consequences of the world colonization of white power structure that created the destruction of our planet in a couple hundred years and not taken accountability and the refusal of giving humanity its freedom. What are solutions? What are the plans that we need to create in order to fix and resolve all issues on this planet as human beings? there's a comment about the pandemic is proving that the planet will heal itself. But I don't think that's part of the question.
Well, another distraction, in my humble opinion, is people arguing over what the correct analysis is, right? And what you find in all civil resistance struggles is they're an alliance of different people with different perspectives, right? So, you know, you have people with a spiritual perspective, people have turned away from God, and that's why we're in the mess. Then you have a Marxist perspective, you know, class struggle, and that's the reason things are in a bad place. And you have a social justice narrative, which we're all aware of. And then you have a liberal analysis, right? The fact of the matter is, lots of people have different analyses, and you're not going to get everyone to agree with the same analysis. How civil resistance works when it's successful is an alliance on a course of action, right? So, you know, like in the French resistance in 1942, 1943, you had conservative Catholics on the same side in the French resistance with radical socialists. And if you know about French history, right, you think the culture wars in America are bad, you should go to France, right, in the early 20th century. Catholics and Republican socialists they were at each other, let's put it like that. So why were those people working together? Because they realized there was an absolute crisis in human values. There was an absolute threat from the Nazis. And that's why they put things to side. And this is one of the things that Extinction Rebellion is saying, which is very misunderstood by people on the radical left. We're not saying the radical left isn't right? We're not saying social justice isn't right. Obviously it is. Everyone who set up Extinction Rebellion has had 30 years of activism on the left. You know, this wasn't some sort of liberal wacky thing. What we decided was we needed to look with absolute ruthlessness at a strategic process which is going to maximize the probability of structural change. And what we did through that research, we researched all the revolutions of the last 100 years in a year and a half before we set Extinction Rebellion up in a social, scientific, vigorous way. And the conclusion we came to was it's an alliance over a course of civil resistance action. You bring lots of people together from lots of different points of view, religious, political, cultural, with one thing in mind, which is we're all going to central Los Angeles and we're sitting down there for 3 weeks, right? That's the central civil resistance model. And there's loads of variations on the theme, you know, but that's it. You know, there's when you're in absolute crisis, there isn't actually that many options. You know, it's a bit like labor struggle, right? There's not 50 different ways to win against the bosses. There's basically one way, right? Which is the strike. So it's the same like when you want to change a government. It's happened 50, 100 times in the last century. What you do is you go to the center of the big cities and you stay there. And that's how it happens. It usually takes about 2 weeks. So, you know, I haven't got access to an objective analysis of why the world is a bad place as it happens, you know. But what I see my role as a social scientist is to tell people around the world how it works, you know, from a vigorous point of view. And that's how it works, you know, and it's not pretty, right? But as I said a few minutes ago, you've got 6 months, 2 years, 5 years to get this done. Because what the social science also predicts is if a society becomes so polarized and so stressed, then it falls into civil war. And that's on the American agenda, as we all know. So there's no, you know, it's a one-track thing, right? That's where we're at, as far as I can see.
So we have a question from Bruce. Bruce, do you want to say your question?
Yeah, real quick. How can you discuss the importance of mobilizing frontline communities as well as, I guess, everyday average people that aren't involved in any kind of political or left kind of thing? You kind of underscored already, but I think that can't be emphasized enough.
Well, Extinction Rebellion, as I see it, has made a major shift in how we look at mobilizing poorer communities, or whatever word you want to use for it, right? What I in particular have been saying is that, as opposed to the conventional wisdom, it's easier to mobilize oppressed communities than it is to mobilize middle-class communities on this particular crisis situation. And the reason for that is because richer people have too much skin in the game, right? Ironically. And for instance, like in the UK, I've done loads of tours and I talk to loads of different communities. And I'll go to sort of North London, I'll give this talk. And as you can imagine, there's lots of intellectual sort of distraction, right? And then people will come up to me afterwards and they'll say, yeah, Roger, what you're saying is totally right. But I'm not able to get arrested because, you know, I've got an architectural contract coming up and I can't afford to lose it, right? You know, that sort of talk. Well, if I go to Scunthorpe, you know, which is a working class Rust Belt place, a bit like Pennsylvania or something, right? And I talk to communities there and I say, we're fucked. Well, they already know they're fucked, right? And then people will stand up and they'll say, right, when are we getting arrested? Who's looking after my dog? You see what I'm trying to say? It's like, if you haven't got skin in the game, basically the issue is community solidarity. And this is what like middle class elite university radical left people don't get, right? Civil resistance is the mechanism through which the poor and oppressed have pursued their liberation over the last 2 centuries. And it goes without saying that it's super tough. And the way they do it is through community support. So one of the things that we need to learn from those communities and is affinity group formation, which means, you know, it's not a matter of Eric and Terry, you know, sitting in the road one day, right? You're going to have Will and Bruce, you know, supporting them and raising money for them and making sure their housing is okay or putting them up. You see what I mean? So civil resistance is a community activity. It's not about individuals. And of course, that tradition is a lot more prevalent in poorer communities. So that's my proposition, right? I'm not saying it's easy, by the way. But, you know, as far as what you say to these communities, I've always said, don't patronize people by assuming that they can't resist, right? When I go into a poorer community, I give the same speech. I say the same stuff. I say, basically, your children are going to die and the country's fucked, and you're going to be the first ones into the furnace, right? You know, you're going to be the first guys sent to war. You're going to be the first guys, you know, that are going to be flooded. And obviously, a lot of these people, particularly in America, know this already. So that's where I'm at on it. And obviously, you know, people like you, Bruce, have got a lot of experience about it. So in terms of the nuts and bolts, you know, I'm not an expert on it, but I think that's the general orientation.
Okay, we've got a question from the other Eric. Is he here? I don't see him in the chat. Oh, there he is. Oh, there he is. Okay. It says, XR says, tell the truth about climate, but what about telling the truth about capitalism, which is a problem that is causing the problem with the climate?
Yeah, well, the slogan is tell the truth and act as if the truth is real, right? So, you know, what people have been doing for 30 years is half telling the truth and then not acting as if it's real. And this is what I'm trying to get Americans and the American political culture to sort of understand. The analysis is not important, right? With all due respect. It's not important at this point in the level of crisis we have. You're not going to, the process here isn't about arguing about whether it's it's racial justice or capitalism or whatever. That's not how human psychology of mobilization works, right? Mobilization works through a visceral, emotional, non-cognitive sense of rage, right? And that rage can come from all sorts of different constructions. It can be religiously, culturally, or politically orientated. And the big danger is this over-intellectualization of resistance, right? We can't go into the streets of LA unless we've sorted out what the nature of capitalism is in the modern world. Well, again, you know, I mean, I'm totally anti-capitalist and blah, 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 but that's not what's going to get the average LA person out into the street, right? What's going to get them out in the streets is a visceral sense of rage about the destruction of Los Angeles, destruction of their livelihoods, their children, and the state of America. And some of those people are going to be anti-capitalist and some of them aren't. But if you're like, you see what I'm trying to say here? I hope you do, right? I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm really interested, you know, I've read my Marx, blah, blah, blah. You see what I'm trying to say? But the house is on fire, right? We don't need to discuss who owns the house and the rental agreement. We just need to get those kids out. And then once we've started making progress on that, then through the citizens' assemblies, then we can stand up and say, guys, capitalism's dead. Well, we all know capitalism's dead anyway, right? Because it's just destroyed itself. But that we don't need to have that big argument with some, you know, farmer in rural California. It's not an important discussion. He'll find out soon enough that capitalism's fucked. We don't need to try and persuade him, because you're not going to persuade him. If you want to get a farmer in California to sit down in the middle of Los Angeles, you've got to say to him, you know, there's no farming going to be left in 15 years, and so show him the chart, right? And get him to talk to Peter Carter. You know, show him some facts. I mean, these are businessmen, right? You know, I've been in business for 20 years. What business people are interested in is facts and figures. They want to know what's happening to their bottom line. So let's go and tell them what's happening to their bottom line. Their bottom line is fucked. They know it already, right? There's going to be no horticulture left in the Central Valley, right? In 10, 15 years. It's gone. So what are you going to do about that? Well, what you want to do is to talk to them about betrayal, right? Because that's what they're going to feel. They've been betrayed. The American dream's been betrayed. Their vision of what they had prepared for their children is gone. And they're going to be so mad about it. And you need to use that rage to translate into civil resistance, right? That's how it works, you know? And I would suggest like morality is rooted in the actuality of civil resistance. It's not rooted in the right analysis. Important as the right analysis is in a crisis, you see what I mean? And what we know is over the last 30 years, the left has indulged in a defeatist intellectualism, right? And you see this on shows in America and shows in the UK. It's like everyone's competing to say how shit the situation is and how great they are that they've outbid each other in how bad it's happening, right? Like at the moment with Biden, you know, who can say how bad Biden is? It's irrelevant. What people need to be talking about is the process of mobilization. You see what I mean? That's the only thing on the table now. And all these intellectuals that just come on to Zooms and you know, YouTube and complain about anything, it's all full of shit, because we don't need to know it's bad. We already know it's bad. What we want to know is what we're going to do about it. And what we're going to need to do about it is to get out into communities and hard mobilizing, right? Knocking on doors, organizing community meetings, organizing civil disobedience sessions, setting dates, creating community, creating emotional connection, making sure that the biscuits and the drinks are out at the beginnings of meetings, being kind and compassionate to people, listening to each other, all these things, right, that enable people to feel like they can make that courageous step to step out into the motorways of Los Angeles and stay there for half a day. And once you've got like 5,000 people arrested, you're in the ballpark of legislative change. It's a numbers game, right? So that's what we need to focus on. And it's non-linear, by the way. just in case you want a bit of good news, right? It doesn't go 20, 40, 60, 80. It goes 20, 40, 160, 600, 5,000, 50,000. That's how social change works. You know, check it out.
Okay, I think we got to the end of the questions.
No, I have two questions listed.
Oh,
Sorry.
what are
Yeah, very quickly, because I know we're coming up on the time for Roger. Roger, what's the most effective way to communicate the urgency of our situation to family and friends over the holidays, right? So many people have family and friends they'll be talking to or having a drink with or eating food or whatever, going to go to some religious ceremony with over the holidays. What's the most effective way first? Second question then is, what's the most effective way to mobilize given COVID in the United States and looks like in the UK is kind of ramping up and then back down to where we are over the next 60 to 90 days?
Well, the first question comes back to, you know, I don't want to sound like a broken record player, right? But there's only, when you're in a crisis, there's about 3 or 4 points, and that's it. It's not complicated. So the central point here is people don't change by having a nice conversation with them over the Christmas dinner, right? People change when you've been in prison for three days and they're like mad as hell at you, right? Because they're threatened by your act of resistance. This is how change happens. Change is not an intellectual process, right? When people's culture and interests are embedded. And the same thing happened with, what's that guy called? Harvey Milk, right? You've seen the film, you've read about the guy, right? You know, they're all going, how are we going to convince all these people that gay rights is good by just talking to them? No. How are we going to convince them is by coming out and saying, I'm gay, you know, I fuck men and I'm proud of it. So get over it, right? And then people know, they can see the actuality of gayness in their face, right? And that's the same thing with the climate crisis. Don't have polite conversations with people over Christmas dinner. It's a waste of space. You know, this happens over and over again. It's happened millions of times in the past and millions of times in the present, right? What happens is a family member steps out, they get arrested, they go to prison, all hell breaks loose. And then there's like a moment of reckoning in your relationships. And they either don't talk to you for 5 years or they become super supportive. There's loads of evidence for it. It's not complicated, right? This happens over and over again. In other words, this is the whole point about resistance. It's the whole point about the theory of civil resistance and the theory of non-violence is the actuality of sacrifice that convinces people. It's not the argument. It's like, hang on a minute, you know, that person's been arrested. This must be serious. That's the thought process. So that's, you know, that's where we're at. As far as the COVID situation is concerned, it's just a complete headfuck. What more can I say, you know, from a mobilization point of view? And, you know, it hasn't happened since 1919, right? So it wasn't really in the XR plan. It wasn't in anyone's plan, was it? But the upshot of it is if the science is right, and who knows if it is, the vaccine's going to come out and then it's going to dissipate. Who knows? I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to speculate. But in so much as it does, then it's all systems go as soon as people can come out onto the street. And my prediction, for what it's worth, is there'll be a massive mobilization once this is over, because I think one of the biggest problems of mobilizing people over the last 30 years is everybody's got the idea that nature's just a little thing that you pat on the head, right? And what we've had with COVID is this massive re-education that nature basically determines us. Nature is our bodies. Nature is our bugs, right? Nature is what happens with little microbes. And if you fuck up nature, then you're going to die, right? That's the message. And obviously a lot of people are going to go back, you know, to massive consumers and all the rest of it. But remember, we're only looking at mobilizing, you know, that 1% of the population or whatever. And we know those people are out there. Once this crisis is over, those people are waiting to be mobilized. And we've got the stats on it, right? So it's a matter of going out and saying, COVID was basically the rehearsal for climate in many, many different ways, as we all know. So, you know, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? 2020 has been a total disaster in terms of mobilization. And, you know, I'm not giving anyone a hard time or anything. That's just the way it is. But 2021 could be like 10 times better than 2019, assuming we can get back out in the streets. Yeah.
All right. So I guess this is the part where we're going to talk about a couple calls to action. We've got a list of.
Can I just say something else before we finish?
Yeah.
I'm just aware that I'm sounding a bit pissed off. I mean, the reason I'm sort of taking no prisoners tonight, because in the UK we've just had a Supreme Court decision that Heathrow Airport, which is the biggest airport in Europe, can expand with an extra runway, and that's the biggest carbon-intensive project in Europe at this present time. It's 40 million tons of CO2 just for that airport, right? Which is bigger than the CO2 emissions of bloody Portugal and Cyprus or whatever, right? And what the Supreme Court has done is said that it's taken into account Paris. And we know from the lawyer involved that we have it in writing that they decided not to take into account the Paris 1.5. So they deliberately and barefacedly lied, right? This is the highest court in the British establishment. They've barefacedly lied to the British people. And I think what we are seeing over and over again in the Western world is that when Paris goes up against the corporate state wins, right? And it's outrageous. It's beyond outrageous. You know, the lawyer who has led the case is now probably going to go to prison because he's exposed it, and that's contempt of court. So this is the future, right? The future is lawyers going to prison. That's where we're heading towards. So you guys don't need anyone to tell you how bad it is in America, right? But that's the world we live in now, right? The liberal elites are not coming to our aid. The only people that can do this is us and the ordinary people that we need to talk to. So there we are. That's the week I've had. Thanks.
So I just had a second thought. What if we all just took a moment of silence, just to kind of digest what we all kind of heard, and you know, prepare ourselves for our next possibly emotional journey that we're going to go on. Just give about 1 minute. I don't have a timer or anything, but we'll just give about 1 minute.